Okay, welcome to our fourth session with Valencia Johnson. She is the Archivist for Student Life at the Mudd Manuscript Library at Princeton University. And she is going to be talking about the Project Stand Toolkit in Archiving Student Activism.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak with all of you today. As I just stated, my name is Valencia Johnson, and I'm one of the co-creators for the Toolkit in the Archivist for Student Life at Princeton University. And you can find information about Project Stand at our URL, standarchives.com. So today I'm going to talk to you more about Project Stand. We're going to do a deep dive into the Archiving Student Activism Toolkit. We're going to share tips on how to get involved and additional resources from Project Stand, and then we'll have a Q&A session and a chance to discuss and hopefully share amongst ourselves ways that we can collaborate more and archive students' work. So what is Project Stand? Project Stand is a radical grassroots archival consortia project between colleges and universities around the country, founded in 2017 by Lael Hughes-Watkins and Tamar Shute. STAND, which stands for Student Activism Now Documented, is a centralized digital space highlighting analog and digital collections of student activism. The consortia aims to foster ethical documentation of contemporary and past social justice movements from underdocumented student populations, especially those from marginalized communities. We also advocate for collections by collaborating with educators to provide pedagogical support, create digital resources, host workshops, in forums for information professionals, academics, technologists, humanists, and anyone who's interested in building communities with student organizers and their allies, leading to sustainable relationships and inclusive physical and digital spaces of accountability, diversity, and equity. And STAN has been the recipient of Institute of Museums and Library Services grants for the symposiums that we hosted over the past year, and other initiatives that are coming out of STAND. So the work of the project is all done by volunteers from our members, representing 71 institutions around the country. And baseline participation in STAND is submitting information about your repository's student activism collections via the collection assessment form. And as of October 2020, we have 394 assessment forms submitted, and the team is working on updating our website and data visualizations. And if you have the time and the capacity, you can join one of the many committees we have that help keep the project moving along. And I can say, as a member who's been with STAN since 2017, it is one of the more rewarding aspects of my job, and it feeds back directly into the work that I'm doing on campus with student organizations in general and with student organizers in particular. So I mentioned that baseline participation in STAN can be submitting your collections via the collection assessment form, and I just wanted to share what that looks like and to share the type of metadata that we are looking to collect in order to provide access points for the users of our site. We have a local controlled vocabulary and glossary for the site that we created since STAN has such a specialized focus on student activism. And we needed more specificity than the SAA's thesaurus for use in college and university archives provided, but more contemporary and respectful terms than the Library of Congress subject headings. And we use all that good metadata in order to build our visualizations by themes across the collections that we have. And on the slides are just two examples, and we are continually working on updating our current visualizations and creating new ones by themes. And just a reminder, this is all done by our great members who are volunteers. So these are just some of the committees you can join if you want to become part of Project Stand. The collections features team help analyze and visualize the data from the form. The amazing grant team keeps us funded so we can do the work and grow even bigger. And if you are website savvy, you can consider joining our website team because it takes a lot of work to update and maintain our site. And all that said, we're also just looking for more people to join and institutions to join as well, so we can support student organizers today and in the future. So once again, this is our site. You can visit after the presentation. I think that the link has been dropped in the chat as well, but I'll be focusing on some of the additional resources later. So the Archiving Student Activism Toolkit. What's inside, how to use it, and throughout this section, I'll be weaving in some anecdotes of how I personally use it in my job. So why Toolkit? In 2019, the membership was asked to develop a toolkit to help archivists archive student activism, and we knew from the beginning that this toolkit would not answer every question about the complexity of student activism and archiving it within a higher education institution. But we wanted to provide and pull from our collective wisdom and professional literature, a tool that STAN could use to share not only with other archivists, but hopefully with student organizers and memory workers themselves. So this is our team, along with Lydia Tang and I served as co-chairs. We have a mixture of archivists from private and public institutions, large and small, and folks who lean more into specializations. And it was a lot of work, but I'm glad that the 6 of us were able to create an initial project that, personally speaking, has helped me foster stronger relationships with organizers at my home institution. So our first step was to survey the consortia to get a sense of what they wanted to see from the toolkit and in what formats. And we prioritized their wishes and stressed to ourselves that this was the first iteration and we didn't have to be exhaustive nor perfect. And then we had to research and actually write the thing. And roughly 8 months later, we have the toolkit that you see today on our site. I just wanted to share a sample of the questions that we asked the membership. This question was used to scope out non-archival topics people wanted more information on, because we wanted to not only care and preserve the documentation activists create, but also care for the people themselves. In terms of what areas of archival practice we should focus on, folks by far wanted to know more about privacy and intellectual property concerns and issues as it relates to activists. So there is a small design gap in the creation of the toolkit. We only asked archivists what they needed and sort of guessed at what students were looking for, or relied on information shared during our symposiums or informal conversations the 6 authors had with students themselves. And all the authors are archival professionals. So for future iterations of the toolkit, we want to hold space for students to speak to other organizers and to speak directly to us. For now, we've made it an intention and a conscious effort to provide as much information about what students can expect and request when entering a potential donor relationship with an archive. Here's the direct link to the toolkit. You are able to save it as a PDF as well. And I recommend saving it as a PDF so you're able to copy and paste some of the language for your professional and personal use. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the toolkit. There are 8 sections, and we try to balance the need of practitioners and students with our writing style. So some information may be out of scope for professionals or too technical for students, but we really try to thread that needle. The sections are building relationships between students and archivists with individual sections for each, intellectual property, privacy and access restrictions, digital preservation, social media, oral history, and a primer on arrangement and description practices. And especially with the last section, we wanted non-archivists to understand the influence they could potentially have and the decisions that we as archivists make when we're describing collections. Plus, there are practical suggestions and resources shared in this section for us archivists to make better informed choices when handling activist material. The toolkit opens with the section about the importance of building relationships with students and archivists. And I know in my role as student life archivist, I frequently encounter students and staff who have a fixed view of what archives are and what it is that we actually do. And so we wanted to combat that, or to expand upon their notions. So we wanted to share questions that any donor, but especially students, could use with any repository, not just one attached to their home institution. And we know that every place is different, but our hope is that this is a useful roadmap for student donors. So some sample questions include, could you describe the collecting focus of your repository and how my materials will complement them? How will copyright, privacy, and restrictions be handled for this collection? And how do those impact me as the creator of the material? And how will your archive contextualize this material for researchers? And who decides how it will be arranged and described for potential users? So this section is to provide archivists insights on ways student activists relate to higher education institutions and the role the archives may undertake. And we're talking about power dynamics, the labor involved in advocacy efforts, the ethical considerations that can potentially have life-altering changes for students. And although collecting documentation can be helpful for future advocacy and the movements they support, documenting activists and their methods can potentially be dangerous or harmful and can affect people's personal and professional lives. And we refer to Project STAN's SAVE methodology, which is stop, assess, view, educate, for this work. And I'll share the URL and further information about this methodology later in the presentation. At the end of the day, we stress that archivists be truly informed and transparent about their institution, the profession, and local practices. Evaluate your institution's ability to collect and preserve the material properly, as well as tend to donor needs surrounding privacy. And consider whether donation of this material to your institution incurs current or future risks to the participants. By far, IP and privacy were the most popular topics for the toolkit, and we're speaking directly to folks whose day-to-day work don't often intersect with copyright concerns in students themselves. Some activist groups are diffused coalitions that come together for a specific purpose, and navigating who has ownership and the authority to donate is tricky. And so we present the advantages and disadvantages of different rights transfers and licensing methods for people. Every institution is different in terms of what they can offer and guarantee to donors in terms of protecting their privacy with access restrictions. So this section brings up ethical questions and considerations rather than solutions. We want donors to have informed consent. We try to lay out the landscape archives, especially those tied to educational institutions, find themselves regarding what restrictions we can generally provide and where we have legal mandates like FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and professional ethics. With emerging technology, individual privacy may be much more at risk, and it may be relatively easy to perform facial recognition of photographs, and providing access to born digital collections may open up the collection to digital forensic discoveries that would need to be addressed as part of the responsible stewardship of the collection. And over the past summer, we've bared witness to many examples of how the surveillance state can use photographs to track down people. And this is why there was a push to stop posting photographs of protests on social media. And also, activists have been doxxed, which is the internet-based practice of researching and publicly broadcasting private or identifying information about an individual, such as their home address, place of employment, phone number, etc. And this opens people to harassment, violence, and harm, not just online, but in the real world. And we have an example this past week about a library worker collecting such information that could have been used to dox people within his community. And given the nature of our digital world, we prioritize sharing digital preservation methods and tools that will help activists preserve their own material for themselves. And even if they donate their material to the archives, odds are they'll retain a copy of their digital objects. So we talk people through file appraisal, good records management methods, such as file naming conventions and good metadata, storage locations, and the ongoing maintenance involved with personal digital archiving. Then we transitioned to social media and how to get your information out of some popular platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And these platforms make it so easy to put your content into and onto their servers, but you have little or no control really what happens to your data. And to paraphrase my colleague and section co-author Annalise Berdini, social media just saves a worse copy of your content. That's to say, these platforms don't preserve bit by bit, they transform your content, and the output of retrieving your data is not always in a friendly format or even a close approximate to the original input. And we also share some web archiving tools such as Archivist. And in my work with students, regardless if they're organizations involved in advocacy efforts, discussing digital preservation and archiving is so important, and one of the first topics we have. And I found so many students at my institutions are curious about ways they can build up their own institutional memory for themselves. They recognize that there are gaps in their knowledge due to just the nature of how students cycle through the university. And they really want to leave behind their legacy so future students will have an easier time of understanding the landscape that they're coming in. And it's been really fruitful and good for me to be like, have you heard about records management and how you can manage your own records? I anticipated those being dry conversations, but they've been lively and interesting to have with students. We included a section about oral histories because often oral history transfers knowledge in a way that traditional documentary methods limit. And this method of documenting may be the solution to the privacy and ethical concerns mapped out in earlier sections of the toolkit. So we define what an oral history project is, the legal issues as it relates to capturing activist stories, how to prepare for your project and interviews, and the best technology to use for your project. Sorry, there's a plane going by. And as with the entire toolkit, this section is not exhaustive nor meant to be the only source you reference when you're embarking on your own project. And I can say that as a person who's created 2 oral history projects with 2 of my colleagues, there is a lot of work, and this is not the only resource you will consult by far. And there are a few oral history projects on my campus, and the interviews are filling in the gap within the archives for our current students and alumni and for outside researchers. We have administrative records that are restricted for 30 years. And so we're just now starting to get the picture of what was happening in the 80s and the early 90s. And the students are, from those periods, are submitting documentation to the archives so we can get the fuller picture of what the campus was like. And giving people the opportunity to contextualize their own experience is a very powerful thing. So arrangement description intended for both archivists and activists alike lays out the power the archivist has in arranging and describing activist collections. So you can think about it as an archives 101 for non-practitioners. So when we come together at the table, we have a greater understanding of what the archival process generally and traditionally looks like. Under theory and practice, we discuss provenance, original order, and imposed arrangement, finding aids, and descriptive language, mainly speaking about the Library of Congress subject terms. And for cultural competency, we provide some quick language changes archivists can employ while conducting descriptive work. For example, respecting pronouns, normalizing asking for clarification on pronouns as a gesture of respect as opposed to accidentally mislabeling someone, respecting how people describe themselves, avoiding colonialist labels and descriptions applied to communities without understanding or respecting their community, and by using their terminology. This enables appropriate representation and the ability for the communities to find their own records within our repositories, and being aware of terms that are only appropriate for self-description. And for further recommendations for descriptive practices, we provide a list to some really cool projects that have happened, such as the Archives for Black Lives in Philadelphia's anti-racist description resources, among others. So how to get involved with sharing the toolkit, submitting feedback, and joining STAND. Please share the toolkit and share with your networks, even if you're not an academic archivist who works with student directly or a student activist. Word of mouth works well in terms of advertising. Whenever I have consultations with students, I share the toolkit, whether they are an activist or just a regular student organization, because it gives them a resource to refer to on their archival journey. And one of the things I stress and relearn is that archiving activism takes time and is often quite reasonably at the end of the priorities list for most groups. So you may have conversations over the course of your time at your institution and even after they graduate, but it's always helpful to have a document for them to reference and the knowledge and the tools to make their material accessible for their members. So what is the future? We are looking for students to join the Archiving Student Activism Toolkit committees. So if you know of a great student, please send them our way. We want to make sure that we are centering their voices and prioritizing their needs in the next iteration. And our research and development cycle is about to start up next month. So right now, if you have any feedback about the current toolkit or ideas for future iterations, please feel free to email me at vj2@princeton.edu with the subject line Activism Toolkit. And you can follow Project Stand on Twitter at Project Stand, PRJCT Stand, for updates about the latest things that the consortia is doing and about student activism efforts that are happening around the country. So the additional resources such as the SAVE, symposium videos, and podcasts. Oh, there it is. Sorry, my notes disappeared. So the SAVE methodology, which is stop, assess, and view, I linked to the direct link there. And it's a methodology that we've been sharing and trying to promote because we know that at times of protest, it can really feel like the pressure is on that you need it collected now or it'll disappear. But we really want people to stop and be mindful about what they're collecting and bringing into an institution, to think about the risks and whether or not it's appropriate for your repository to hold on to these materials. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we had symposiums. We were able to host 4 symposiums around the country that centered the local student activist stories and have really fruitful conversations between them and informational professionals. And we were able to record all of them. And so you can go to the site and catch up. The students who we invited to speak were amazing, and just hearing firsthand of what it's like to be a student now and trying to graduate and keep your job and to push people forward on initiatives that you really believe in. It's just an invaluable experience. So I really encourage you to check that out. And a new project is the Project Stands podcast, where we're having deeper interviews with some of the student activists that were featured in our symposiums and other artists and memory workers, so we can have that firsthand account of what it's like to be them and for them to pass on the blueprint of their activism to future generations. And so I wanted to give special thanks to previous STAND presentations and presenters because they helped with this presentation today. Last month, we presented for the Society of American Archivists and the Dublin Core Metadata Initiative. And to give credit to this amazing slide deck, because I did not create it myself, that is not a skill set I have, but Slide Carnival is a really great resource to use if you are ever in need of a good template. And I just wanted to again say thank you so much for your time and your energy. And if you are wanting to know more or wanting to join Project Stand, you can again visit the website and again follow Project Stand on Twitter. And then now it's time for our Q&A and our discussion.
Thank you, Valencia. That was excellent. Yeah, so if you have questions or comments, drop them in the chat. We have lots of time to discuss, get in the nitty-gritty of this. I was wondering if you could expand more upon your work at Princeton and what have been like, because here at the Gore Center at MTSU, we're part of Project Stand, and the difficulties of trying to tap into student groups sometimes, especially when you're coming from the institution because they don't trust you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips that have worked for you at Princeton that might be able to work at other institutions?
I don't have any tips for how to initiate contact, but when they actually reach out, I've always found it best to just be upfront. And it kind of always takes them by surprise because they're like, wow, you're so frank and candid. And it's just like, well, yeah, it's like, I'm not trying to trap you or anything, especially when we were doing our oral histories. So we're mandatory reporters. And so stating that up front and be like, hey, I'm a mandatory reporter, just to let you know. So like, we're not in this weird situation where I have to report something because I've had that experience and it's not a good one. And just showing them that I'm going to be honest and that I care about them, it's been really fruitful. And so it's just being like, you know what, actually, the university archives, since we're open and equal access library, we can't just limit access to students. Like that's something that we can't do. But maybe you want to consider having reading room only access because that just limits, that adds on a mediation between us and the collections and stuff like that. Like examples pop up like that. And then again, word of mouth, if I interfacing with one group, then they tell their friends and their colleagues, and then it grows that way. And it's slow. When I first started in 2018, I was just like, and it was a project at that time. So I'm like, oh, I have like 2 years to make an impact. And I put a lot of pressure on myself of like, I got to get the word out there. And then I just found out that, you know, it's ebbs and flows, and that as long as they know that I'm here, they'll come to me when they need me. But it is hard because, you know, we are the man.
Right.
And I found also just for support for me is getting a closer relationship with the campus partners. So like the affinity centers was really helpful because they also framed my expectations of like what it's like to be the representative of the institution, but also being like, I'm just a staff member. Like I don't have power.
Right. Yeah. I think that the biggest problem archiving student activism is that there's turnover, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is like this rush to, you got to get it while they're here, because then once they're off in the real world, they're just going to forget about the institution and or not want to deal with it, which is understandable.
Yeah, but I also found that there's always at least one person who's just like, who kind of, it just clicks with them. They're like, oh, I'm going to use the archive to bear witness and keep receipts and be like, no, we had these conversations, this happened. And so even after they graduate, that sweet spot, like right after graduation, before maybe they have, they move and have their job, they're just like, here's all the stuff. And it's like, thank you. But hold on, you need to fill out this form because I don't know who you are. A drop and run, but in the digital space still happens.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Have you received any pushback in your work at Princeton?
No, I've been really fortunate, but I also think it's because I fly under the radar.
That's
And
what I say about us here.
and also people don't know what archivists do.
Yeah. Like, oh, the librarian, they're like librarians. Surely they're not doing anything bad.
um, yeah, this past summer has been interesting, and I've gotten support from our Office of the Dean of Undergraduate Students. Like they've sent activists my way, and they were like, "Hey, no one's on campus. Can you like swing by and take photographs of these protest signs?" And so they're aware that we have activist material and that we're interested in it, which is great. And they've been a great help of being like, you can talk to these people. But I haven't had any pushback, thankfully. But I know that's not always the case.
Right. Let's see, we got a question in the chat. Becky asks, are there resources or tips to convince library leadership that collecting student activism archives is a good idea?
I don't know any resources, but a tip is I've always framed it to justify sometimes, is that it's part of student life and that's my job. And like, thankfully I have a title where it's like, I archive student life, it's in my title. But like, students are always active. They're always advocating for something, and to not have that dimension in the archives is misrepresenting what's happening and what has happened. And so I would try to frame it like we're doing our due diligence is within our scope, that, you know, this is part of campus life. This is part of the conversation that the university administrative offices are having. And so it's not an extension, it's like something that we should be doing. And I'm glad that you're able to have that conversation with your supervisor, and I hope this helps. Or sharing Project Stand of like, hey, people are actually doing this. This is in the spotlight, especially now. I know that given the summer that we've had, there's been a lot more focus on student activism. We've gotten more reference questions and inquiries about it, and about what we've kept and what we haven't kept, which is always interesting to have those conversations with the student paper of like, well, why don't you have this? And it's like, well, no one gave it to us. That's like, we're not hiding anything. No one has it. So, and I would try to make connections with students who are interested in it as well. Because that's another thing, the students may be trying to build up their own archive or their own website. That's been a popular idea, is like, how do we build our own repository that's separate from the institution? And so maybe you can join forces with them. Because I know in a lot of ways, admin will listen to the students before they'll listen to us.
Yeah, I think Becky showing them Project Stand, because what did you say? There's like 70 plus institutions involved. So right there, I mean, and it's across the country. So just saying like, hey, there's a precedent for this. We're not making up something new.
Yeah, and there's like 400 individual collections too. So it's like you have a network.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Can I pose a question to the audience?
Yes.
I guess I'm curious on how many of you are able to work directly with students. And they don't have to be activists, just like students in general.
You can put it in the chat. You can use the raise your hand function down at the bottom. are actually in participants. There are also some students in here. I know that.
Oh.
There are a couple students in here.
Well, hello.
I think I might have some students in here too.
Yeah, I think what's just I know there are a lot of you that don't work at academic institutions, but I think the projects in Toolkit, what's great about it, I think it's applicable to just activism in general in your community. Yeah. You know, ethically archiving and documenting marginalized communities and activists in a way that's safe and not committing more harm. So it doesn't have to just be students, you know, any local history that involves an activist organization. It's really helpful.
Yes, and oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I guess I could contribute something. I work at Tennessee Tech University Archives and Special Collections. And so we are a public university that is in a rural setting, kind of in between Nashville and Knoxville, if you're familiar with the geography. And admittedly, I'm pretty new in my position, so Megan could probably talk more on this, but we're in a situation where my boss got her position about 5 years ago and is having to really, the past 5 years has been spent professionalizing the archives, essentially getting finding aids actually being functional and useful. So a lot of our work has been very internal focused on just figuring out what we have and then getting it out there. And I think something that we've been doing more this year has been starting to reach out to different student organizations. And a lot of that has been through other groups approaching us. So you were talking about different affinity groups on campus. So our Black Cultural Center reached out to us to make exhibits for their anniversary. And that led us to get into contact with the National Society of Black Engineers, our local chapter. And because of these different connections and us showing up to events that were not archives focused, but that those students were at, we were able to make that connection and be like, hey, we have some of your photos. Oh, we can try and help you figure out who your founders are. You just said you wanted to do that. So we're very much, and Megan might add more onto this, it's one of those things where it just takes a little while to start making those connections and get students to realize that we even exist and that we are actually interested in not just the university's history, but their history. So yeah.
And I will agree with Hannah. Hannah just started, which is awesome because she's really been able to help us perform this work, because it is important to reach out to these people or to reach out to different groups on campus and things like that. But you aren't able to do it as well unless you actually have a functioning archive. So the actual part that needs to exist with us, especially with digital preservation and things like that, those were all, we didn't have proper storage or anything like that. So all of that is now in order. So I feel like now we can also logically reach out to people and tell them all of the things that we can help and assist with. So.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
I'm always looking for to expand my professional network and be like, other people are doing this. So because sometimes it feels like, and I know it's not just me, but sometimes I'm just like, it's just me. Is this a cool thing? I don't know.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the students will be doing that you're looking to join and help with the next iteration of this? Because I have a student in mind who's been doing some really great, he's been taking stuff from our digital collection and like making like rogue public history signs across campus about our racism on campus. So like, I think he would love to be involved.
Yeah, so we're thinking of the students joining the team and being a full-fledged member and writing sections that aligned with their priorities and their experiences, so we can have like case studies and also talk about non-archival things of like, how are you taking care of yourself? How are you maintaining yourself while you're doing this work and balancing everything? So that's what we're looking for. So if all the students out there on this call, feel free to email me and I will get you in touch with the larger team, or send folks our way, because we really want this to be a community tool, and be fluid in a living document. Because we know that activism that happened in the 90s definitely doesn't look like the activism that's happening now, and 5 years from now, it's going to look different as well. And then I see in the chat that, again, with the anniversaries, I love anniversaries, because then they're just like, we need all the things. And then sometimes I got to be like, you should start a relationship with us so future you can have things, because right now we don't have anything for you.
Yep.
And it's always hard to tell people that, because it kind of feels like a disappointment, but you're like, I think I had a thought and now it's away.
It's that kind of year.
It is that kind of year, and it's been interesting working with students who are activists during COVID, because it's just like, it's just another barrier, because you can't just sit down and have that conversation. You have to like plan it, and it has to be a little more structured than what it usually, or what it could be, of just meeting in a physical space.
Yeah. What people sometimes ask me is like, how have you found these students that you work with? And honestly, it's not through the traditional means of an archive. They're not coming into the Gore Center in our research room saying like, hey, they don't email me first. I usually find them through social media, and we befriend each other, and we start to build that personal relationship on social media.
Mm.
And then, so the student I was talking about that would be perfect to join Project Stand, we linked up on Instagram. And that's how I started to see him posting these things across campus. And I was like, hey, I work at the archive. Like, I love what you're doing. Fully support this. How can we support you to do more of this? And that's how we share stuff back and forth. And, he's like, I'm looking for this. So I went and scanned stuff and send it to him through OneDrive. So we've never met in person, but I've been helping him, this whole semester doing stuff. But so, yeah, I feel like sometimes to reach students, you got to go through non-traditional means that us archivists are used to.
Mm-hmm.
You got to find where the students are and go to them almost.
Yeah, yes. Because once pre-COVID, when we were on campus, like there was a protest happening outside of NowCell, and I just dropped by because I knew some of the students who were there, and so like having that facial recognition and showing support that way. And then this whole separate group was like, oh, we saw you and talked to X, Y, and Z, and so now they're coming to me, and it's just like, oh, okay. It always takes me by surprise, just like what students know and how they're aware of me, because I'm just like, oh, I'm not behind in my technical services area.
Right.
Out in the community.
Yeah.
This is just a question that's just so Sarah, we have, and I don't know exactly, Valencia, if you reach out to using this too, but we've reached out a lot in Facebook and things like that, but I'm also assuming that we're going to also start losing touch if we continue with methods such as Facebook to reach out to these students, because I know that they're going to be moving on to something else. Obviously, most of them have already. Is there anything that anybody else has tried that's not a Facebook to reach out to students to kind of, I'd like to call it like just like tap it, like to figure out what all is going on for the younger generation? So I speak. So has anyone used anything else?
I had really good traction with Instagram from the library's Instagram and doing Instagram stories. That's how we promoted the oral history project that we had for COVID, and I could see the number of engagement there. Also Twitter was really good. And it really did work because people came back to the website for the project, and I saw like a dramatic increase in viewership that way.
Yeah, here at MTSU, so the Gore Center itself has a Twitter and Facebook. We do not have an Instagram, but because of how MTSU student organizations interact, I think we need to get one because they don't use Facebook. Our students mostly use Instagram. That's their main site for all their student orgs and how they share their meetings and other resources. So that's how I've been connecting with them, is mostly through Instagram and Twitter when I can't physically go to their meetings. Because normally I'll try to get in touch with the Intercultural and Diversity Affairs director here, kind of oversees all the student orgs. So I can get in touch with him and say, hey, which student is president of this org right now? I want to email them and say, can I come to your opening meeting to just explain what we do and how we're interested and how we can support them as students. So that's obviously harder to do now in COVID times, but yeah, our students are really into Instagram. That's where they do all of they share their protest flyers and all of their activism through that source. So like I said earlier, we've had to meet them where they are. So yeah, I'm probably gonna have to start an Instagram. Add one more social media thing to my list.
Yeah, and also we have this weird new program. I shouldn't say weird, but a brand new program that the university is doing called Winter Session. So the break in between fall and spring semester. And so they're doing any type of program. So anyone could submit it. And so working with the folks that oversee all the student orgs, we put together an like archiving your student records event, and they're doing the publicity. So they're pushing it out. And so it's not coming from the library, it's coming from folks that they already know. Has been really helpful getting the word out.
Nice.
Yeah, because that helps break down some of that mistrust that might be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also with the trust thing, I forgot to mention earlier, not being afraid to say no. Or telling them like, now is not a good time for you to donate because we can't meet your requests, and just give them the tools. So like, here's how you can maintain it yourself until there's a time where you feel comfortable and we can actually fulfill what you're looking for. Because even after we had that conversation, we're still in contact. They still ping me and ask me questions of like, what are checksums? And I'm like, oh, come to the dark side of archiving. I can show you all the things.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. Because when we do this, we want to make sure that we're meeting their goals of privacy and safety. So, and just our own time, if we can't commit to it, then. And I think that's part of like, I think we're moving towards that post-custodial anyways. We'd rather the community archive themselves and keep that within their own community instead of a traditional institution that has been historically oppressive. So yeah.
Yeah. And also a good outreach thing that I found really useful is bringing the archives to them. So pulling out those student narratives that we have in our records, and in doing the hours of labor of researching and going through the boxes and putting it in like a presentation or creating a data set for them and then letting it go. We did a presentation called Student Activism Then and Now, and then we just released all our findings in a Google Drive, and like I could see because we're the owners of the drive, so we could see the people visiting and usage statistics that way. But that was also a way to kind of build that relationship and build trust, and being like, we as the archives, like, our job isn't to censor or conceal anything. If you ask us a question, we're going to give you the answer as we know it. And also, like, what you're researching is private. Like, we're not going to tell anyone because that's professional ethics.
I love that idea. That Google Drive. I'm going to email you
Yeah.
that later.
Yeah, let me pull it up. Because I created also, in addition to just being able to be like, here's this toolkit.
Right.
It'd be like, which has, again, other purposes. Does not just have to be for student activism. It's activism in general, and student organization management in general. I have a LibGuide, and the presentation is, I should have sent the direct link and not just the whole LibGuide. I'm sorry. That is my bad. But yeah, so we created the data set because I digitized some things, but like it was only the tip of the iceberg. And then I was just like, here you go. Here's all the information. And hopefully I can continue to add to it once, we have our collections back.
Yeah. I love this. Thank you so much. This was a great discussion. Does anyone else have any questions they want to drop in the chat or open up your mic?
Any tips you want to share with us? Because I'm all for two-way communications.
Anyone?
Wow. If you are, again, feel free to email me at vj2@princeton.edu. If you want to just talk shop, there is my Twitter handle in the chat.
Hi, can you mind? I'm sorry, I look awful. I did not expect to turn my camera on today.
You look fine.
I just wanted to say thank you, actually. I heard you speak a couple of weeks ago. I want to say it was the College and University Archives section meeting. And something that you said sort of like sparked an idea for me that I think is going to pan out pretty well with like connecting with student organizations and just like popping into a meeting like once or twice a year to just like get archiving their things on their mind, even if they maintain it for a while before giving it over to us, just to like spark that initial thought. I could like ran it by some of our student workers who are also in social clubs and student organizations, and they loved it. They were like, that's something great. We could definitely give you like an hour of our time. That'd be a cool activity. So I think it's going to actually turn into something awesome and interesting. So I really just wanted to say thank you.
Yay! I'm so excited for you. That's awesome. And it's nice to see you again. I thought I recognized the name, and I'm like, why is this name standing out to me?
Yes, it's me. I'm everywhere.
Yeah, no, oh, that's so lovely. Yay.
All right. I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Valencia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, everyone, the next presentation starts at 2:35, so about 10 minutes.
Enjoy the rest of your conference, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.